My name is Marnik. I'm working for an organization called WorldLoop, and we're actually today we're talking about, like Elizabeth mentioned, so downstream partners and also the preparation of fractions to organize transboundary movement shipments. A quick and short note on my organization. We were founded in 2009 to help address the growing global e-waste problem. We're actually a daughter organization of a nonprofit organization called Close the Gap, who actually sends used IT equipment to mostly Africa, in order to be used in schools and in nonprofit organizations so that they have affordable, high quality ICT equipment. WorldLoop was actually founded to support recyclers in Africa, in South America, in Southeast Asia as well, to help them address the e-waste problem. We do this through knowledge support as well as financial support. So we actually try to help recyclers with, for example, these kind of webinars. But on the other hand, we also have a program in which we financially stimulate recyclers to not only collect highly valuable materials, but also let's say toxic e-waste that might otherwise be ending up in landfills and or might be incinerated. If you want any more information on that, of course you can address me after the webinar. And one important final note on that is that we really want to do it right. So we focus on safety and on sustainability. So for the partners in our network, we really expect them to follow up safety regulations and to dispose of let's say dismantled fractions in an environmentally sound way. So of course we always refer to the Sustainable Development Goals, and there's actually kind of a common denominator, which is environmental sustainability, in which you try to, or in which the world tries to encourage the reuse of working equipment and sound recycling, to make sure that resources are used optimally, and that we give either a second life to the equipment that we use, or that we make sure that material is treated so that it's kind of reverted back into fractions or products that can be used for new manufacturing. Interesting in that domain, just an FYI, is that there are quite some grants and loans available for within the Sustainable Development Goals. So I really encourage all of you to look into that and try to find innovative financing ways for your business. Now, the WorldLoop approach is actually in line with the Best of Two Worlds approach from STEP, so that the STEP community developed a couple of years ago. And the idea is that if an electronic device enters the market and it's been used until it's really totally broken down and doesn't function anymore, and if this is devices that are for example, on the African market, that the devices are collected locally, that they are dismantled so that you take everything apart, so that for example, the metals and plastics that result from that can be reused on the local market, where there are often good applications for reuse, and that the high valuables and also the non-valuables that result from this dismantling, that these are shipped back to, for example, Europe, where we have a high advanced technology to make sure that these fractions are being processed in the best way and the most efficient way possible. Unfortunately, these kind of highly advanced installations don't exist on, for example, the African market today. One example is, for example, Umicore here in Belgium, who process printed circuit boards. They have a highly advanced smelter for this, and the let's say the investment for this type of infrastructure is huge, which is why it doesn't exist on the African market yet. Which is why the best of two worlds approach seems the best way for us to address this problem and to really ship complex fractions to Europe in order to be treated um, well in a good way. Of course, at the underlying rationale under this is that in most African, South American, and Southeast Asian countries, there is a lack of legislation, and there is no what we call extended producer responsibility. So, for example, here in Europe, most of you must know that, but if you buy electronics, then you pay for the actual recycling after the end of life of the material. Unfortunately, this doesn't exist in most African and other countries, which is why we need other solutions. And then we think that the best of two worlds approach is really addressing this in the best way possible today. Now, for the e-waste collection business, I would say that there are three essential steps. The first one is, of course, the collection of e-waste on the market. This is something that we won't address today in the webinar because it's out of the scope, but it's of course a logic first step. Second, there's a need of dismantling. This is, I would say, a first step to proper disposal of e-waste. And then the third step, disposal itself, is the main topic today. I'm quickly going over dismantling because, like I said, it's a nice first step. For me, dismantling is all about unscrewing different components, so taking them apart and going into like single components. It's also the stripping of cables. You take apart the rubber or the plastic from the copper cable inside. And for most of these fractions, there are local applications available. For example, copper. There are buyers in most of your countries. There must be buyers who are interested in buying copper. So there's no need to ship this kind of material back to Europe for treatment. You can do that locally. And then third, there's a need for dedicated sorting, and that's really the first step towards proper disposal and also towards the transboundary movements. It's really important to make sure that if you make large collections of e-waste, that you dismantle everything and that you then sort the different fractions that result in a good way, so that these different fractions can then be addressed individually. There is a very good guide on dismantling IT equipment that is co-developed by the STEP community. I've put the link in the bottom of the slide. It's a paper from 2015, so it's rather recent. And if you go to the website, then you'll see that there are various tutorials, let's say, for different types of electronics. So I welcome all of you who are still struggling on that to really take a look at the website. It's really interesting. Now, the third step and the topic that we're addressing today is the disposal of material. There are three main aspects for this. First of all, there's valuables versus non-valuables. Valuables can be, for example, printed circuit boards, copper wire, these kind of things. But there's also the non-valuable, so material that's actually costly to recycle and that doesn't give a profit to the recycler, such as, for example, CRT glass or lithium batteries. And these then often end up on landfills, which is, of course, something we want to avoid. Second, there is difference between disposal on the local market, for example, for construction or local production, as compared to the export of either the export of material either to other recyclers. So that happens as well. There's export between different countries or between continents, between the recyclers themselves, but also, of course, at the third step, transboundary movement of complex fractions that require, let's say, advanced technology for optimal resource recovery. And this is an important distinction. So there's also exports to other countries where material can be consolidated. I know, for example, Seth from We Center is joining the call. I know that We Center in Kenya receives waste from other recyclers in Eastern Africa, so that it can be consolidated and then can be addressed in a more, let's say, in higher volumes, which can be an advantage. The transboundary movement. There you have different steps in the process. The first step is dedicated sorting. Like I already mentioned, it's really important if you disassemble everything that you sort the different fractions that result in a proper and in a dedicated way. Then the second step is to identify fractions for which there is no safe and responsible local solution. So, like I mentioned, there's quite some local applications for example, metals that result from electronics. There is no use in spending on transport and logistics for these kind of things to send them to Europe. These can be reused locally, so that's the most logical thing. But of course, there are other fractions for which there is no safe and responsible local solutions. These need to be identified and then treated in another way. Then a third step, and most of you, if some of you must have already organized transboundary movement shipments, you know that there is a difference between what the so-called green listed waste and amber listed waste. The green listed waste is what we call non-hazardous, in the sense that if you ship these items in a, for example, container, there is virtually no fear of incineration or of explosion of the equipment. So that's green listed, and the procedure for this is also more straightforward than that for amber listed waste. The difference between these two types of e-waste is actually set in defined in the Basel Convention for the control of transboundary movements of hazardous waste and their disposal. The Basel Convention, as most of you know, is kind of an international treaty to to basically prevent and regulate the transport of hazardous waste between countries. Like you all remember, in the past there has been quite some abuse in this sector with European companies and governments sending their old e-waste to African countries in order to get it to just get rid of it. So that the Basel Convention tries to address this and has put a stop to that and regulated the business. Here you see an example. I also put on the link for you to check on the website. There you can see the difference between green listed and amber listed waste. I'm not addressing this in detail now, but you can also always check and see if the fractions that you have in-house are considered green listed or amber listed. I've also put on a couple of examples here. So green listed waste, like I said, and I've specifically gone into the items that are and interesting for transboundary movement shipments. So green listed printed circuit boards, SIM cards, hard drives, optical drives, these kind of things. And amber listed are CRT monitors, most batteries, not all of them, most of them, as well as printer cartridges. And I've also put in the bottom either on the green side, these are valuables. So most of the time, when you send a consignment of these kind of assets or these kind of fractions, then you will receive a profit or an income from the recycler that you send it to. whereas for the amber listed items, you will probably have to pay for the treatment of the equipment. So that's well, and that's also there. I can also make the link to the extended producer responsibility, which I talked about earlier. So the amber listed waste here in Europe, the solution is that we actually pay a contribution when we buy an electronics. We pay a contribution, and that contribution is actually collected by a central organization that then makes sure that after the life of the equipment, it is recycled. And that's actually that kind of constitutes the budget for that. Unfortunately, this legislation doesn't exist in most African countries and South American countries, etc. Which is why with WorldLoop we also set up the financing scheme that I talked about earlier. So this it's actually a system in which we provide e-waste certificates, and if the partners in our network report to us which kind of waste they have collected, for example, CRT monitors or but also green listed waste, then we can give them a contribution for every ton of equipment that has been collected, so that we can kind of set up a similar system, but after the collection. So here in Belgium, for example, I live in Brussels. Here, you pay when you buy electronics, you pay already for the recycling. Our system with WorldLoop is kind of turned around, where a recycler collects e-waste and then gets paid for a specific amount for a ton of collected e-waste. Now, one of the main topics of the webinar is to prepare the fractions for shipping, and I've put a couple of images on the slide to show you that how, let's say, the ideal preparation is performed. You see on the bottom left corner, you see printed circuit boards. These can be put in a container directly, so it's not necessary to put them in big bags like you see on the other pictures. But you can, of course. I would say that for loading, it's probably way more interesting for you to put it in big bags, but you're not obliged to. But you have to make sure that, for example, as on the top left corner, you see that there is a pallet with nicely stacked fractions in big bags, but unfortunately it has fallen down and is now taking up too much space in the container, which is not ideal. Bottom right corner, you see equipment that's been shrink wrapped. That's also a very good way and a very efficient way to pack material. That way you can really put everything very close to each other and thereby create as much space in your container as possible. Something important that I actually forgot to address in the slide, but that I want to point out now, is that there is a difference in the valuation of these fractions. For example, printed circuit boards, there is a difference in quality between them, and you will also these will be valued by the recycler differently. So if you're preparing your equipment, and we're going to address that in one of the next slides, but a recycler will ask you to send them some pictures of the material that you'd like to send. If you have a high fraction of or a high volume of good quality printed circuit boards, make sure that you take some nice pictures of that, so that you can show that that it's in a really good shape. But you don't have to overstate it either. So if half of your load is actually very low value printed circuit boards, then you should not lie about that and just show what you have in house, because the valuation will afterwards be rectified after the processing by the recycler. So you have no there's no advantage in overstating what you have in house. You can also ask the recycler that you identified to work with to what their preferred way of packaging is actually. So you can ask them, if you haven't ordered a container yet to store your equipment, then you can ask in advance, okay, how would you like us to pack and ship the stuff, and they can also give you some suggestions for that, which might be helpful. An important thing here as well is that you keep track of what you're loading. So if you have a container on your premises and you already want to get rid of everything in your warehouse and you put it in a container, make sure that you weigh everything and that you count the number of pallets that you're loading, so that you for the shipment, we're going to see that later again, but for the notification procedure, that you know what you have put in the container, and that you have the exact weights of the load. That is important. And then lastly, in preparation of the shipment, make sure that you have enough volume. So you will see later on that you can ask the recycling partner that you identified, that you can ask them for a quote for the material that you have in store. And then you should make sure that you have that your volume is high enough, because of course you'll be paying quite some money for the shipment. And if you're then not shipping so much, and in the end you realize that the valuation of your load is lower than what you paid for transport, then you're making a loss, and it's of course something you want to avoid. So make sure that your volume is high enough if you want to ship. Now, like I mentioned, there is kind of a notification procedure for e-waste, and there's a difference between green listed waste and amber listed waste. We're first going into the green listed waste. And as a first step, like I just mentioned, you need to really inventory what you want to ship. So I don't know if it's clear enough on the slide, but this is like an example of an inventory where you can put down the number of big bags or drums or pallets of for example, cell phones or processors or mixed cables or power supplies, whatever you're shipping. And if you have an idea of the price of these assets on the market, you can already evaluate it for yourself. Otherwise, you can always ask the recycling partner, the potential recycling partner, what the value might be, so that you have a good idea before you ship what you might be earning. Then, second, in most countries, it's necessary to request an export permit from your country's authorities. And if you have to if you're landlocked and you have to cross borders in order to get to the port, then you have to make sure that you have permits for your neighboring countries as well. So make sure that you look into that before you start this procedure. This is an example of such an export permit. It's different for every country, but you can address your country's authorities for the template, and they will make sure they'll help you. Thirdly, the inventory that you made in the first step, you can send this to the recycling partner that you identified, and also, like I mentioned, a couple of pictures for them to have an idea of what the equipment looks like and how it's stored, or how it has been put in the container if you've already done that. If you find an agreement with them, so they're going to quote the inventory that you submit. And if you agree to their rates, you can of course always address other recyclers and ask for their quotes. If they have a better quote, then you can maybe go with them. But if you have an agreement, then you can draft a contract. So this is also necessary for the procedure. There's a kind of a standard contract between you as a supplier and then the recycling company that is taking over the load. Most of them actually have a template that they can send to you for this contract. So you really shouldn't be drafting this yourself if you don't know how it works. You can just ask them for the template, and they will ship it to you or send it to you. The fourth phase is to fill in the Annex 7 document. That's a document that's also been established by the Basel Convention. And it looks like this. It's actually a standard document where you have to fill in your own information on your organization, information on the recycling partner that is going to import the equipment, the load, the waste generator as well. You can look into this after the session as well. But you can find this document online very easily. It's called the Annex 7 document from the Basel Convention, so pretty straightforward to find it. And there's also really interesting and really helpful tutorials and explanation documents which give you an overview of the file, and for every different number, so there's several numbers on the file, as you can see. It can give you a step-by-step explanation of how to fill this out and who should be filling this out, because some of the blocks are not supposed to be filled in by you. So that's the Annex 7 document for green listed waste. Next, you can draft a pro forma invoice for the recycler based on the quoted value of the load. Here's an example from my friend Seth from the WE Center. He drafted this to WorldLoop, actually, because we operated in this specific consignment as a middleman for the recycling by a Dutch organization called Jacomij, who is an electronics recycler with more broad, let's say, a broader scope than, for example, Umicore. This pro forma invoice is also needed for the shipment, so you will have to send this to the shipper, which is why you have to draft it in the first place. So you just ask, based on your inventory, you ask the recycler to give you a quote, and then you can put this quote on your pro forma invoice. And this, of course, after the load has been sent and processed, there will be a final valuation of the load. But this pro forma invoice is the first indication to the value of the shipment. Number 6, you need to send this Annex 7 document that we filled in the previous, or 2 previous steps, in step number 4. Send it to the shipping line of choice that will perform the transport to Europe. You're supposed to find a shipper that is willing to take on your container and send it to Europe. But then, of course, if you're not situated in a port, then you will have to engage a local transporting company to send to pick up your container and send it to the port. So you can already start looking for a party that can do this for a reasonable price, so that you can already start organizing the transport. As you see, this is a packing list template. This one is from Umicore, and there you again have to give the gross weight, the weight per pallet, the net weight, the weight of the pallet, and the net weight, etc., of everything that you're loading. So this is where the first step of making good inventory comes in handy. Then step number 7 is to send the bill of lading that you receive from the shipping line. You will have to send this to the recycling company in Europe or their forwarding agent. So depending on whether they arrange this themselves or work with a handling agent, you can send them the bill of lading. This is to be sent by courier. Hey, you will receive an original of this document from the shipping company, and you will have to send it by courier to the recycling company, so that they have the originals as well, so that they can go to the port or have their handling agent go to the port and release the container of customs. The recycling company will normally also make sure that the container is picked up at the port. They will perform customs clearing, and they will transport the container to their facility. But of course, these charges, the charges that come with this, will be deducted from the value of the load. So that's important to take into account. That of course, the recycling company is taking care of all of this, but it comes with a certain price. But that will be communicated to you in due time, of course. Then, after reception of the final valuation of the load, you can draft a final invoice. So the recycling company will send you a valuation. It'll let you know, okay, we have received this and this and this, and this is the value that we attribute to it. Then you can draft a final invoice, and from this invoice, either you will be counter invoiced by the recycling company for the transport and import charges, or they will you can make your final invoice and already deduct that figure so that you have a net income stated on your invoice. And then finally, you will receive a certificate of treatment that guarantees recycling of the sold fractions, and that's very important for your reliability as well. If you're working with big companies that that send their e-waste to you, then it's really good to have this certificate so that you can show them, look, this material has been processed in an environmentally sound way and really according to all legislation, because that really puts you on a stand as a recycler, as a highly valuable recycler who's doing things right. Yeah, that was actually it for the green listed waste procedure. It's quite lengthy and there's quite some time you have to put in this, but I think once you get a hand of it, it becomes a bit straightforward. And if you know the different steps to follow, then next time it will go easier. But the first time, of course, it's it's quite an adventure, and you'll find out that it can be a bit complex. But on the other hand, you also have the local authorities as well as a recycling partner to help you. So you should be doing okay. Then, like I mentioned, there's also an amber listed waste procedure, and it's a bit more elaborate, certainly with regards to the notification procedure. There's some additional information that is required from you. Here you see an example from the Annex 7 document for amber listed waste. You have again different boxes where different information is supposed to be written down. Like I said, you can look into this in your own time, really detailed, and then again, there's quite some information available online to help you go through the document and fill in all the necessary information. So you shouldn't be too scared about that. Just checking my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. Yep. Then the additional documents required with regards to the green listed procedure. Here, for amber listed waste, you will need a financial guarantee. So you will have to go to your bank and set up a separate account in most cases, where you can put aside some money as a guarantee for the shipment and for potential disposal of the material. So that's important. If anything would be wrong with your shipment, or if there would be any problems with it, then you will have to make sure that you can guarantee that the material can be disposed of by the shipping company or an authority, and that these charges can be taken from the separate account. Of course, this is a very highly unlikely situation. I mean, if you respect all the steps in the procedure, then there shouldn't be any problem. But in the highly unlikely event where this account needs to be addressed, you have to provide the financial guarantee to make sure. Well, actually, that way you show that you have the necessary funds to process to cover the costs for the processing of the equipment and the transport. Second, you need a proof of registration and a proof of insurance of the shipping company. You can request that from the shipping company that you have identified, and they will know what you're looking for. They also they're aware of the procedure of amber listed waste as well, so they know what you're referring to. Thirdly, you need to fill in a declaration of dangerous goods. This is also something that's coming from the shipping company. They will provide you with this declaration, and you will need to fill it in. I didn't put on an example, but like I said, you can request this from the shipping company, and you will receive it upon request. Fourth, you will need to provide an MSDS sheet, a material safety data sheet to the shipping company. Fortunately, that's only one per product type. So if you have different brands of equipment, then you can, for example, for printed circuit boards, there's just one MSDS sheet that you need to provide, and it will be okay for the entire load. This is also something you can find online. The MSDS sheets are actually produced by the producers of the electronics that you're processing, but you can find a lot of these sheets online, so it shouldn't be too much of a hassle to find them. Then fifth, you have to send a pro forma invoice to customs in the import country. Again, you can ask the recycling company that you have identified for the prices that you can put on the invoice. So in this case, you can ask for quotes for the load that you have ready, and then you can put it on a pro forma invoice that you will need to send to the customs agency in the country of import. Here again, you just list the different fractions that you would like to send. You give a valuation based on the input from the recycling company, and you send the pro forma invoice to customs. Of course, you can ask the recycling company for contacts at the customs office, because they are in contact with them all the time, so they can help you identifying the right party or the right person. Then there's also a movement document. This is a bit the same as the notification document that you saw here on this slide. But the movement document is actually something that you have to send for every shipment that you do within a certain time range. So here, for the notification, you have to here, number 6, intended period of time for shipments. There you can indicate how much time you would like to perform shipments. So this notification procedure is actually something that you get approval for a certain period. For example, for 1 year, you can perform shipments if you have successfully executed the notification procedure. And then for every shipment that you do within that period that you have been qualified for, you just need one movement document in order to get the shipment going. So the notification procedure here with these different steps, you won't have to do that every time. You just have to provide the movement document for previous consignments within then the period that you have been qualified for by the authorities. This one, just quickly going through my notes. Yeah, so this movement document again needs to be sent to the recycling company or their forwarding agent, so that they have all the necessary information. And you also send them the bill of lading after you have received it from the shipping company. So they'll provide you with the bill of lading, like we saw in the green listed procedure. Sorry. And this one, together with the movement document, you send by courier to the recycling company so that they can clear the container once it arrives. And then the procedure is the same as with the green listed waste. You just you wait for processing by the recycler. They will send you a final valuation. They will let you know what the charges for transport and customs were, and then you can draft the final invoice for the equipment. Sometimes, of course, if you're shipping non-valuables, it's possible that they will charge you for the processing of this equipment. So it's also possible that you will receive an invoice yourself. You can counter this by, for example, sending green listed waste and amber listed waste together. That's possible, so that you have a valuable and non-valuable load, so that you don't get a huge invoice, and that causes a cash flow problem. So that was it on the amber listed waste procedure. Like I said, it's a bit more complex than for green listed waste, but you should do okay if you if you're getting some help from the waste authorities and from the recycling company. Now, we're quickly going into the financial implications of these transboundary movement shipments. There's a couple of issues. Of course, first there's a cash flow issue. Some of you who have already performed transboundary movements have experienced this. You only get your payment after the processing by a recycler or a smelter. And also the profit of your load is only known after you have invested in the entire process, not only your resources and time, but also financially if you've requested transport from your facilities to the port. You've already paid for transport there, and only after processing you know exactly what the profit is going to be. So that's a bit of a disadvantage. However, there's a solution for that. It's called a letter of credit or a standby. Well, actually, it's the two. It's a letter of credit and a standby letter of credit. In a letter of credit, the recycling company's bank can provide you with this document. So it's called a letter of credit, for which then you will actually already be paid. So you can set up this construction where the bank from the recycling company can already pay for you after shipment of the material. So it doesn't have to be processed by the recycler. You can just ship the equipment and you can get paid by the bank based on the valuation that the recycling company gave you for the inventory that you sent them. And then after processing of the equipment, you will receive the difference between the actual value and the estimated load of the value. And so you get a valuation, but then of course after processing, the final valuation is known, and then the difference is either covered by the bank or the recycling company itself, depending on what has been agreed upon in the letter of credit. And on the other hand, there's also a standby letter of credit, where a bank in your own country provides this type of document to the recycler. They will probably request this. If you ask for a letter of credit, they will probably request a standby letter of credit. But the bank in your country can then provide this document to the recycler, which guarantees that you can pay back a part of the price of the load if it doesn't have the estimated value. So the recycler gives you a valuation of based on your inventory and on the pictures that you send. But if afterwards it's clear that the load is less valuable than was thought, the standby letter of credit can cover this and make sure that the recycler knows that you have the necessary funds to refund if that is necessary. A second issue is, of course, the transport charges, which can be quite high for landlocked recyclers. And there, a possible solution is to consolidate loads from colleagues or the competition, maybe, if you'd like to call it that way. These consolidated loads can then be shipped together, which makes the transport charges lower per ton, let's say. And aside from that, if you're sending regular consignments, or if you're planning on sending regular consignments, then you can negotiate rates for regular transport with a transporting company in your country of residence. This might also take the transport charges down, but it will really depend on the volumes that you can ship. So this is a negotiation process between you and the transporting company, but it's a possibility. And then thirdly, one of the other things that we are supposed to address in the webinar is the different receiving parties for the fractions that you send. So you can send equipment to a broker. So that's mostly a local party that buys the valuables that you have in house. These parties will very take over your non-valuables and the let's say amber listed waste. They're only interested in the valuables, which we call cherry picking, as most of you know. A broker can give you short-time gains because they will buy the the fractions as is, and you don't have to ship them and wait for a recycler in Europe to process them. So you will have short-term gains, but on the other hand, you have no guarantee whatsoever that the material will be processed in a responsible way, and you have no certificate to show to your partners and to the organizations that we work with that the material has been recycled properly. So that's a problem. Next, you have electronic processors who, like I mentioned before, for example, Jacomei in Netherlands, in the Netherlands, which we have worked with often in the past. They actually process various kinds of fractions, and that can be really an advantage as compared to, for example, Umicore, who focuses on SIM cards, cell phones, and printed circuit boards. If you're looking for a one-stop shop where you can just ship all the complex fractions that you don't have local solutions for, well, then an electronics processor is probably more interesting than a smelter like Umicore. The advantage of smelters is that they almost always offer the highest price. So they focus on specific fractions, and they also can offer the highest prices for this because they have a very efficient process with which they can recover almost all of the valuables in the e-waste. So they can they almost always offer the highest prices, but you can only ship very specific fractions to them. And then finally, we have drafted a couple of lessons learned during the experience that we have built up over the last 9 years, almost 10 now. And there are 3 key lessons that were learned by ourselves and the network that we support. And the first one is that you actually need the e-waste volumes and the operational size to be able to reach a certain level of self-sustainability. We've learned that from various of our partners. It's better to in our let's say from our point of view, it's better to support and scale a limited number of projects than to try to keep a lot of small projects running. Again, the WE Center as an example, it took 5 years of support to get the WE Center to its current status, but now the WE Center is doing really good, and they've a couple of good contracts and good partners, which makes their business sustainable today, and that's great, and that's really a very very good example. And then aside from that, you can also look for other sources of income. For example, refurbishment of ICT computers and laptops that are still reusable can be refurbished and resold to on the local market. You can go for circular activities based on reusable fractions, other types of waste collection and treatment, for example, plastic waste that can sometimes give value to your operations, for which you often have already the necessary machinery in place to process it. So you can also look into that and see if it's an interesting thing to add to your activities. Maybe on the next slide, a couple of examples of applications for e-waste. You see printed circuit boards that have been reused. You see, of course, metal that has been melted and reused for kitchen accessories, let's say. There's also the plastics that can be turned into tiles or into pipes for construction. So that's all really nice applications that can bring value to your extra value to your organization. The second key lesson that we learned is that there's a need for solutions for non-valuable and for toxic fractions. That's pretty straightforward. The non-valuables, certainly if you have to ship them to Europe to be processed responsibly, then there's really quite a cost involved, and we really need new applications for that. And we're always trying to identify this. So if you in your network or you yourself have found a great way to address non-valuables, then please share it with the STEP community and the people from GIZ as well, so that this can be replicated by other recyclers as well, or other collectors. And then thirdly, and that's also pretty straightforward, there's a need for legislation and a financial framework, not only in African countries, but also in some South American and Southeast Asian countries. There's really a need for legislation to get access to the volume of e-waste present and financial framework, so that you can set up extended producer responsibility network and can well create some value for this industry, because that's really something that we're trying to work towards, but it's a difficult process. And for example, again, taking Kenya as an example, I know that there's legislation in Kenya that's been stalled in Parliament for 5 years now regarding e-waste treatment. That's really a shame, and it would be a great step forward if these kind of legislation proposals could get some more support from local politicians. Then evaluating the e-recycling process. This is also just an overview slide, let's say. So there's the valuable materials in electronic waste. There's a positive business case to be made, but often the profits are not enough to cover the cost of non-valuable treatment and processing. So that's really a shame. Second, the best of two worlds approach that I addressed at the beginning of the webinar, it really drives income. I mean, sometimes if you collect high volumes of green listed and valuable e-waste, then you can really get some profit from your business, which is great. So the entire procedure, the shipping procedure, it's quite complex, but it's also profitable. So it's really something that we would like you to look into. If you have quite some stockpiling up, then this is a great way to generate extra income. And then again, as mentioned in the previous slide, we need more circular innovations to create local products from materials like iron, copper, aluminum, so that you can get a higher price on that on the local market as well. It would be great if we could find extra new applications for these kind of things that bring value to the entire community. And then finally, of course, the informal sector only focuses on the valuable materials. Everything that's been said on the right of this table, and you have some examples in the bottom. You'll see that the informal sector is probably not interested in that side, but only in the valuables on the left side. That's pretty straightforward. And then for the non-valuable materials, again, there's a big cost to collect and store them. There are no local solutions. The best of the world's approach is often too expensive here. So if you're shipping only amber listed waste, you'll see that it's a costly affair, and you have very little incentives to do this. So that's why we really need this legislation to come in place. And also here we need innovations, new ideas, startups working on e-waste and really addressing amber listed waste that is non-valuable, but that can maybe find new applications locally that still bring some value for the community. And then maybe oh, my laptop is almost out of battery, but I'm almost finished also. But this is a nice webimentary, so documentary on the web that we made with WorldLoop. You can click the link and check it out. It's nice to bring your story as well. So if you're trying to convince partners of the potential of your business, then you can always go to this website and check it out with them. And that was it actually.